Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah, and I'm a member of Justicia. We're coming with a webinar from 3 different cities, Toronto, Windsor, and Halifax. And before we begin our webinar, I would like to do the land acknowledgement. So Windsor is on the traditional territory of Three Fires Confederacy First Nations. We have the Mi'kmaq Nation, which is the colonial name is Halifax, and Toronto. And all 3 cities are part of the treaty called the Dish with One Spoon, a treaty. And so this treaty was originally between the Anishinaabe, Mississaugas, and Haudenosaunee that bound them to share the territory and protect the land. And subsequent Indigenous nation and peoples, Europeans, and all newcomers have been invited into this treaty in the spirit of peace, friendship, and respect. So before I hand it over to our special guest who will be speaking about recent immigration policy changes, I would like to speak to you about Justicia's position on these policy changes. And by the way, I should also introduce you to our speaker. His name is Thiago Buchert, and he is an immigration lawyer who practices in Halifax. So the Canadian government has announced a short-term access to permanent residency for 90,000 people. Out of this number, 30,000 spots are available for international workers. Migrant farm workers are also eligible to apply for these spots. We think that these measures do not go far enough to address Canada's racist and exclusionary immigration system. For migrant farm workers, the application process is onerous and expensive. The language requirement and legal fees to apply for the program is unrealistic for workers who make close to minimum wage. And undocumented workers are ineligible to apply. For this reason, Justicia strongly condemns the Canadian government for making short-sighted reforms that yet again leaves migrant farm workers behind. With that said, I would like to hand it over to Thiago to tell us more about the policy changes. Welcome.
Hi, Sarah. Nice to be here. So, yeah, as Sarah just said, this is a temporary, short-term pathway with a cap. So only a certain number of immigrants are able to immigrate through this program. This program is limited to only immigrants who work certain jobs, only immigrants with status, and there are a number of other different requirements. So this isn't a permanent solution to Canada's, the way Canada treats migrant workers. It isn't the beginning of a solution, but it's something. So my purpose today is just kind of outline the basics of the new program. And if it does work for you, then it works for you, and that's great. It won't work for everyone, but just kind of outlining the basics and seeing if that's something that might be an option for you. So let's get started. So it's a good idea to talk about the reason for this application stream. So there are basically three reasons for why this stream exists. First, Canada needs to maintain its immigration levels broadly. And the way to do that during the COVID-19 pandemic is to make people, Canada decided that the way to do that during the pandemic is to make people who are already in Canada permanent residents, because they don't necessarily want people from outside of Canada traveling into Canada. So that means they're offering permanent residence to people who inside Canada who are working or have work experience who wouldn't otherwise be offered permanent residence. It's also a way to reward essential workers like migrant farm workers who are essential to keep our country going, who have been the victim of a lot of outbreaks of COVID-19 due to the way that Canada houses and with the way we legislate and govern migrant work. So for the first time, really, Canada is offering an immigration pathway to those who have migrant work experience. And for the last reason is that a lot of industries have been hurt by lack of workers from overseas, partly due to the pandemic. So this is a way to kind of staunch those industry-specific problems. So in short, this is an opportunity. It may be an opportunity for you. If it isn't, well, it won't be. But there may be other pathways and other options opening up over the next several months. So keep an eye on Canadian immigration news. So this is a public policy-based immigration stream. So what that means is it's not based in law, legislation written by anyone, or is it based in regulation? So it's subject to change, and the government can kind of do whatever they want with it. So keep that in mind as well. If you are able to immigrate through another pathway, it would probably be a good idea to do that other pathway, temporary residence to permanent residency pathway that exists, that was created by public policy. Just because of the fact that it is temporary and there are another number of limitations on it, and the government is doing a lot of new things with it, so there are kinks to be worked out. And this period. All right, so the timelines. This pathway was announced basically 2 weeks ago. So 2 weeks ago, the only people who knew that this new pathway would exist are people who worked in the government. They announced it very suddenly. They opened it up basically 2 or 3 weeks after it was announced. It opened up today. The specific requirements of the pathway were announced yesterday at around 3 o'clock. So not even 24 hours before the pathway opened, people were not knowing any of the specifics. And finally, this pathway will close 6 months from now, or earlier. As we'll discuss later, there's a cap on the number of immigrants who could apply through this pathway. So what this all means is all this is happening very suddenly. This is not intended to be a permanent pathway. This is not something you will be able to rely on in the future as it is designed now. Hopefully, with advocacy and the increasing focus on essential workers and migrant farm workers, pathways in the future may be opened up, but this will not be one of the permanent pathways. This is only a short-term solution to primarily Canada's COVID-19 issues. Okay, so as Sarah said, there are 30,000 spaces available. There are two other pathways, one for healthcare workers and one for international students. Those apply for them, but for essential workers, for migrant farm workers, and those who speak only English, not French, only 30,000 spaces are available. And in those spaces, you're going to be competing with people in other essential occupations, such as custodians, cashiers, other types of essential workers. And it's on a first-come, first-served basis. So if you listen to this presentation and decide that you might qualify, you should apply as soon as you possibly can. One quick note: if you speak French, the quota does not apply to you. So even if more than 30,000 people have applied, you still will be able to submit your application. And the government has a handy quota tracker that you can look at to see how many spaces are available. So let's look at that right now. One moment. Okay, so here's the one we're talking about. Here's for essential workers. And you can see that as of right now, so that's 7:10 Toronto time, 2,900 people have applied. So basically, we're already at 10% of the cap. So keep that in mind. In order to apply, you need to have certain documents. The people who've already applied already had those documents, so that's good for them. But as you're rushing out to get documents, keep in mind that this cap will be increasing, and once it hits 30,000, you'll no longer be permitted to apply unless you speak French. The two other streams we briefly talked about for healthcare workers. Healthcare workers seems like there's a lot of space available, so just over 1% of the application quota has been filled. And it's the opposite situation with international graduates, where almost half the quota is already filled. So very quick turnaround time on that. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Okay, so let's talk about the requirements. In order to qualify for this application, in addition to meeting the requirements to immigrate to Canada generally, so not being inadmissible for criminality, health reasons, whatnot, and in addition to paying the fees, there are 4 main requirements. Number 1, you need to have 1 year of work experience in an essential occupation in Canada. Number 2, you need to meet their language requirement. And in this presentation, we're going to be talking about the English language requirements. Number 3, you need to be in Canada right now when you apply, and you need to stay in Canada until the application is decided. And number 4, you need to be currently working right now when you submit your application. So let's quickly go through those and in those requirements in more detail. You need to have 1 year of work experience in an eligible occupation over the 3 years before you apply. So it's now May 2021. So all work experience before May 2018, between now and May 2018 counts, as long as it was in Canada. If you didn't work for 1 full year straight, or if you worked part-time, that's fine. You need to have the equivalent of 1 year of work experience. So Canada's determined that means 1,560 hours of work. So if you're not sure you qualify, check your pay stubs. Make sure that you have the required number of hours before you submit your application. It can be in 1 or more eligible occupations. So if you worked for example, 6 months as a cashier and 6 months as a farm laborer, those together would equal 1 year, and you're able to apply. You must have been paid salary, wages, or commission, so you couldn't have volunteered or whatever. You can't employ yourself. You have to be an employee of a company or an employer. And your work must be authorized, so no unauthorized work will be able to count. Again, this will leave undocumented workers unable to apply under this stream. You must also be working in an essential occupation. These are determined by what's called your National Occupation Classification Code, or NOC code. It's a 4-digit code that corresponds to every job that exists in Canada. So being a lawyer, being a teacher, being a baker, all those have specific 4-digit codes that correspond to your NOC code. If you came under a labor market impact assessment, or if you have a closed work permit of any kind, your work permit has a NOC code to it. So you can contact your employer or look at the labor market impact assessment you use to get your work permit. That will have the NOC code on it. So what I've done is just listed a number of NOC codes which may apply to migrant farm workers. So general farm workers, if you work in harvesting, landscaping, logging, seafood plant workers, some agricultural contractors, livestock workers. Check this. All these NOC codes are available on the government's website. So just Google temporary residence to permanent residency pathway, essential worker, not codes, and there'll be a big list of them. So check and make sure your work experience is under an eligible not code. If it's not, you won't be able to apply. So that's work experience. Next, language. So in order to meet this, to apply, you need to have an official language test showing that you meet the Canadian language benchmark level of 4. To give you an idea of what a 4 is, a CLB 1 means you basically don't speak English at all. CLB 10 means you're basically native. It's your first language. So if you're not sure, I've included a link for a self-assessment tool that you can use. It's basically a free test that you can do online to measure your listening and reading skills. And once you complete it, it takes about an hour. You'll get a score, which will roughly correspond to what they think your CLB level is. Of course, it's just a self-assessment tool. It's not perfect, but it'll give you some sense of what your language level is. If you're at a CLB 2 or 3, it may not be worth it to take the official language test, which you'll need to apply because the language tests can be very expensive. If you already have a language test, it can't be more than 2 years old. And just to give you an idea of what a Canadian language benchmark level 4 is for the various tests, there's 2 tests you can take. CELPIP General, where you have to have 4 in every category. So that's listening, reading, writing, and speaking. And IELTS General, where you need to have a 4.5 in listening, a 3.5 in reading, and a 4 in speaking and a 4 in writing. Keep in mind that the testing spaces are booking up very quickly. The Government of Canada has reached out to the testing agencies to make more tests available, but you probably won't be able to get a test anytime the next month or so. And again, keep in mind that number of people who've applied into this category keeps increasing. So again, very much not fair to workers and that they have to compete with each other in order to qualify, but that's the way it is, and that's the program. Okay. And I've included that link where you can do that self-assessment tool, and that will be provided to you. All right. Okay, so the third requirement is to be physically in Canada. So you need to be in Canada. You have to have status in Canada. So if you are a visitor, worker, or student, when you're able to restrict, you qualify because you have status in Canada. You must have status of both when this application is submitted and when it's approved. We don't know when it will be approved, when the processing times will be. We do know that these applications will be prioritized. It should be approved within they say by the end of the year. That seems optimistic, but that's what they're saying. You need to intend to live outside of Quebec. So this program is not available if you want to live in Quebec, even if you speak French. So if you speak French and qualify, you still do not qualify if you want to live in Quebec. And that's the reason for that is the Quebec government's their stance on immigration in general, and the fact that they didn't buy into this program. And finally, you need to not be inadmissible to Canada. We already talked about that. Finally, you need to be employed when your application is submitted. You can be employed in any position, full or part-time. It doesn't matter, as long as you're employed. You cannot be on leave. So if you're on maternity leave, unfortunately, you won't be able to qualify. You need to have the ability to work when your application is submitted. So if you have work permits, you have the ability to work. If you don't, then you may not qualify. Okay, now submission. To submit this application, you'll need to apply using a dedicated online portal. You can only apply online. There's an exemption if you have a disability. You can include your family as long as they are your spouse or common law partner, or your children your children to come must be under the age of 22. They must be unmarried. The application fees are expensive. They are $1,050 for you. If you want to bring your spouse, that's another $1,050. Each of your children are an extra $150. And for biometrics, that's a fingerprint and a photograph. You need to pay $85 for one person, or $170 for any number over one. Make sure that your application is complete and has all the required documents. They may not be returning applications. They may only be refusing applications. And that's a big problem, because that means they get to keep your application fees. So be careful with that. Okay, so that's the situation. I just wanted to leave you with a checklist. If you feel that this may be an option for you, here are the things to do and in the order in which to do them. Number one, check and see if you have the work experience needed. Check your NOC codes to make sure that your work experience you do have is under an essential occupation. Check and make sure that you were authorized to work during that period, and check and make sure you have the required number of hours if you don't have 1 year of continuous full-time work experience. I know a lot of agriculture workers are seasonal workers, so you may have to take your pay stubs and physically count the hours to make sure you have 1,560. If you do have all that, if you do have the work experience, check and see if your languages, if you have the high enough language ability in English or French. Use that tool I just sent you. If you feel that you might be able to reach a CL4, then you can book a language test for yourself. Language tests, again, can be expensive. They cost between $150 and $200 to take, last time I checked. So do that if you feel you might qualify. And if you've booked the language test, you've counted your numbers, then you should start obtaining essential documents. Get police certificates from every country that you've lived in for 6 months or longer since turning the age of 18. Get your pay stubs and employment letters just so that you can prove that you have the work experience. Get marriage certificates for your spouses, birth certificates for your children, and divorce certificates for former spouses. If you've done, you'll need to show a medical exam. If you've done a medical exam in the past, you can upload that. If you haven't, do a medical exam and upload it. If you aren't able to book a medical exam in time, book the medical exam and upload proof that you've booked the exam. You can do the same thing for police certificates if you don't have those as well. And finally, once you've begun doing that, then you should work on obtaining the required information. So basically, they'll need your complete personal history, travel history, and address history over the past decade or since you turned the age of 18. You'll want to cross-reference that information with previous applications you've done, like work permits. So that's it. We'll move on to questions. I just wanted to give you a brief overview of that program and give you a list of steps to do to make sure you can take advantage of this application. It's not for everyone, and it's not enough, as UCCS said, but it's something. It might be an option for you if you want to move forward, but go in the correct order so you don't waste time and money collecting things in the wrong order if you're not able to apply. Okay, I think that's all I have. So I can take questions if you'd like.
Thank you so much, Thiago. So I have a few questions, and if people have more questions, please feel free to leave them in the chat, or you can also send us anonymous questions through our question form. So our first question is, can someone with a score in, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce this, CELPIP score, 6, 5, and 7, and M meaning insufficient, are they eligible to apply, or are they able to meet the language requirement? And how much, and what are the consequences to the application?
So in order to qualify, you need to meet a CLB level 4 in all 4 specializations. So if you have a 6, 5, and a 7, those all qualify because those are over 4. But if you don't have at least a 4 in the last one, you don't qualify. So you won't be able to supply. You won't be able to apply. You can try getting. There's nothing stopping you from doing another test and trying to improve that last score. But unfortunately, you need to qualify in all 4 of them in order to apply.
Okay. Sorry, I'm looking everywhere because I'm looking for the questions.
Yeah.
Now, the other question that we received is, I don't have a permit and I only have a receipt with my company. I've been there with the company for 3 years and I'm going to be starting again for another 2 years. Am I eligible to apply? And if I miss a question in the test for the language requirement, does that mean that I'm gonna fail the test?
I don't think so. So the way the language tests work is they're graduated. So first they'll ask you relatively simple questions in English. And if you do well with those, they'll keep increasing the difficulty until either they find you're a perfect English speaker and you're a CLB 10, or you'll stop somewhere. If you stop at 4, you're fine because you've met a CLB 4. So the fact that you take the English test and you don't know one of the answers doesn't mean that you don't qualify. So that's regarding the language test. I'm not sure what receipt means here. I believe what you mean is if you don't have a permit and it's expired, but before it expired, you applied to extend your permit and you have an acknowledgement of receipt, then if that's what you're talking about, then yes, you can apply. What you were on is called maintain status. It's exactly the same as if you had a permit. Basically, your status continued until there's a decision on your application. So you can't apply under that. Just make sure you upload proof that you've applied, the acknowledgement of receipt. I believe that's what that's talking about.
Mm-hmm. Are there any health requirements to have your application approved?
Yes. So when you take a medical exam in order to immigrate to Canada, they're looking for 3 things. Well, 2 things really. Number 1 is to make sure you don't have a communicable disease, which historically meant tuberculosis, mostly. If you have tuberculosis, they'll basically just keep you outside of Canada until you stop having tuberculosis, and then you take another test and you come. So that's the first reason. The second reason, which is more important, is what's called excessive demand medical inadmissibility. If the government believes that you will cost a lot because you're disabled or you have some sort of other condition to the public healthcare system, you'll be medically inadmissible to Canada and they won't let you immigrate. That has been one of the more offensive parts of Canadian immigration law for a very long time. The government has severely limited it, well, significantly limited it in recent years, so that's progress. It's definitely progress. It still exists though. So because of the government's recent policy changes, it's applying less to fewer and fewer people. Basically, unless you have a serious medical condition that requires significant medical intervention that's not medicine on a continual basis, it shouldn't be an issue.
Okay. Somebody asked for the link for the language test. It's the CLB link. I'll just post that in the chat then. And that's the language test. Okay, and then The other question we have is, when I'm applying, do my children need to be in Canada with me?
No, you can apply for your children overseas, and they'll come when you become a permanent resident.
Okay. So how much am I expected to pay for legal services, test, medical certificates, and the classes, English classes that people are offering?
Well, the medical certificates for a medical exam, it costs about $200 for an exam for one person. So multiple exams are multiples of that. Legal services, you'd have to check locally. Legal services can vary tremendously, especially if you're using consultants. English language tests, again, vary dramatically. There might be options online. There may be options for yourself to just self-study. What was the last one? Was that it?
So legal services tests, medical certificates, and English classes that people are offering.
Yeah. So the language exams, about $200. The immigration medical exams are about $200 as well. So factor that in, and the application fees, and the cost of things in your home country, like police certificates and things like that. It can be expensive, so make sure that you qualify before setting out and trying to do this.
Okay. If I'm not successful, can I appeal the decision?
Not really. So basically the way it works is only a certain number of actions in Canadian immigration law you can appeal internally. Refugee refusals, some permanent residence application refusals like spousal sponsorships. If you're already a permanent resident in Canada and you're losing that status and they're asking to deport you for whatever reason, sometimes you can get an appeal. For most of the time, no. Probably not at all for this application stream. However, anything in Canada that the government does, anything that the immigration system does, you have the ability to what's called judicially review it, which is basically submitting an application to the court to review the decision if the decision is unlawful in some way, not just unfair, but unlawful. If the officer reviewing your application made a huge mistake, then you might be able to judicially review that. Those applications you do need a lawyer for, because that's basically a legal application that you make to a court.
How long can it take to actually have a successful judicial review?
It depends. Sometimes when you file an application, the government's lawyer will just look at the situation and understand that they made a big mistake and concede, and then the application you'll basically win within a few weeks. If the government doesn't admit that you have a mistake, then it's several months. Let's say 6 to 8 months, and that's before COVID, so it'll be longer now.
Okay. If I'm not successful, will I be able to return to work as a farm worker?
Yes. So think of permanent residence and temporary residence as two completely different things. Nothing you do in permanent residence really affects your temporary resident status, and vice versa. Under some programs, you need to have status in Canada, so you should maintain temporary residence status if you can. But yeah, if you're not successful, you just continue with whatever situation you were before. So your work permit continues, and you can continue applying. It doesn't really affect anything.
What will happen if I get fired during the solo stick processes?
During which processes?
I'm actually not sure what that means. So say, I'm assuming they mean like the process of getting this application through.
Okay.
What if I get fired in that process? Do I have some kind of implicit status?
So you need to be working when you submit the application.
Mm-hmm.
As soon as you submit the application, it doesn't matter. You could get fired and it won't affect anything. your status in Canada, if you're a worker, you need to have a work permit. That's your status in Canada. Mm-hmm. However, if you lose your job, you still have worker status in Canada. It doesn't go away just because you lose your job. Now, it may not mean a whole lot because you have a work permit saying you can work in a specific job, you know, and you got fired from that job, so you can't work there. That means you can't work anywhere, really. But you still have worker status, so you still have valid status.
So what if I'm working now when I apply, but I'm not working when the application finishes? Does that have any bearing on my immigration status?
I don't think so, but make sure you maintain your status.
Okay. I am worried about cost. How do I know I'm not getting scammed? And do you have any strategies of what I can do to prevent that?
So first off, if you're going to be submitting your application yourself, the opportunities for scams are quite few. So make sure that all the websites you use are official Canadian government websites. They'll all have the same, they'll all start with www.canada.ca. So make sure they're the official government websites with everything you're doing with them if you're submitting an immigration application. If you're doing a language test, if you're providing funds for a language test, make sure it's the official CELPIP or IELTS language test. Mm-hmm. If you're doing police certificates, make sure you follow the instructions on the Canadian immigration website about how to obtain the police certificates. And also talk to people in your home country to make sure that the people you obtain the police certificates from or the organizations you obtain them from are legitimate.
Are there any dangers of scamming when it comes to getting the right legal services, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, be very careful. If you're hiring a lawyer, you're probably okay. You can check, obviously, do your due diligence. You can call them. You can check reviews. Ask people in your who you know. If you're doing consultant, be very careful. Immigration consultants have a history of scamming people. The regulation of the industry is very little. Be especially careful of immigration consultants that are not based in Canada.
Is there any website that they can go to, and I can add that into the chat potentially for either lawyer referrals or anything like that?
Not necessarily, not that I know of.
Okay.
You reach out to law firms. I don't know of a website that lists immigration consultants, but I wouldn't. Maybe there is one. I just don't know. Yeah. Sorry, I can't provide more information.
No problem. There's another, I think this is a follow-up questions with regard to status. What happens if my work permit expires after submitting my application for this?
That's fine as long as you're working when you submit the application.
Okay.
You need to maintain your status though. So you should have status from when you submit the application until the application is decided. So you can apply to extend your work permit if you can. If you can't find a job, you can apply to switch your status to visitor. You won't be able to work, but you'll have valid status. You should be prepared to wait several months without being able to work. Or you can always apply to switch it back to work permit when you do find a job. But make sure you have valid status.
Okay. I have another question here. If I apply for permanent residency, paid my fees, submitted all my documents, and I'm just waiting to do the test, and I assume they mean the language test, what happens?
I believe they mean the medical exam.
Okay.
Once you submit your permanent residency application, you probably would have already submitted language test results. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you're just waiting. So you just continue waiting. Once you do your medical exams, that usually means you're pretty close to obtaining permanent residency status. Again, nothing in unless your permanent residency stream, it somehow enables you to apply for a work permit. Nothing you do in permanent residency land really affects your temporary resident status.
Where do you go to extend your work permit?
You can apply online. That's the only way to apply right now, unless you have a disability which prevents you from applying online. And that's the Canadian government website. Just go to canada.ca, apply for a work permit. Okay.
And I have some more questions coming in. 1 second, I'm gonna refresh this. So if I only have elementary school education, do you think this is a good pathway for me?
Potentially. So there's no education requirement in this stream, and that's unusual, and it's a good thing. So if your main, potentially your main barrier there would be needing to pass the language test, because the language test does include reading and writing. However, if you're able to read and write, and there's nothing preventing you from applying. So there's no requirement to have education with this stream. So check that you would be a good candidate for that English language self-assessment tool that was posted. Check that out, see if you're able to apply, because those measure reading and writing. I mean, those measure reading.
Okay. If I'm undergoing a spousal sponsorship, can I do this at the same time?
You can. There's nothing stopping you to. If you're doing a spousal sponsorship, though, I would just stick with the spousal sponsorship. It's a very straight pathway to permanent residency. You can get a work permit with it if you have status, and it's probably be about the same amount of time. I wouldn't waste my time. If I were you, I would wait. I would just stick with the spousal.
Okay, but there's no harm in doing both at the same time.
No.
Okay. I think I'm just going to prioritize this language test link so people can see, and it's just here. Okay. New messages. What if I change my status from a musician into a work permit?
So a musician.
Yes, go ahead. No, that is the question.
So musician, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Some people are able to work without a work permit as musicians in some limited capacities. So I don't know what your status is now. There's no musician status. You're either a visitor or worker, probably. But you can do that. You can just apply to extend your status as a worker or change your conditions to become a worker. There's nothing stopping you from doing that.
If I have criminal record, can I apply?
Potentially. So you need to not be criminally admissible to Canada. And that means not be, and there's all sorts of rules for what makes people criminally admissible. If you've committed, basically that's kind of a whole nother subject. If you've committed a crime which in Canada would be an offense that is indictable and not just summary, then you might be criminally admissible unless you passed a certain amount of time between then and now. That's kind of a complicated question. You should check online. Again, the Canada.ca, there are rules surrounding criminal admissibility, and that might be able to help you. They might be able to help you. You can check a lawyer. You can speak with a lawyer too, and see, and they'll be able to help you.
Do you think that drinking and driving can have any bearing on my admissibility?
Yeah, that's the big one. So a DUI in Canada was recently changed to become serious criminality. So basically what that means is if you were convicted of drinking and driving and paid all your fees as soon as you were convicted, all your fines and everything, and served your sentence and did everything. 10 years since that date, I think 10 years, maybe 5. And it's been 10 years since you've done that. You may no longer be criminally admissible. However, if it's within 10 years and you didn't file any application with the government, you're probably still criminally admissible, and you won't be able to apply under this program, unfortunately.
Does that mean that if I was caught drinking and driving in another country, that would also have a bearing on my application here?
Yep. Yeah, the way it works, it doesn't really matter where it is. They'll take the offense in your home country and compare it to the Canadian offense, and it works the same way.
I have another question. I have been working in Canada for the past 15 years, and I'm from Trinidad. Can I apply, and can my whole family apply for the program?
You can include your family members as long as they're under the age of 22. Your children are under the age of 22. Yeah, and just think about that. 15 years of temporarily coming to a country, and this is the first time you have a shot. It's just terrible, but it's progress. Maybe you might be able to immigrate finally after all this. And I have heard that the government is looking to build on what this temporary program. I have heard they've looked at they're turning their attention to more blue collar immigration. So I have heard it recommended from other lawyers that even if you don't qualify, even if the cap is reached and you aren't able to get your application in, that you might want to start getting your documents in order. So hopefully that means that there is a permanent pathway for people like, Ricky here, who's been here 15 years and still needs to, still can't be with his family in Canada. So
I'm just going to follow up on their question. When we say whole family, who does that include?
Yeah, excellent question. Thanks for pointing that out. So family in immigration law basically just means your spouse and common law partner and children under the age of 22 who are unmarried. The ability to bring over sisters and brothers is very limited in Canada. Parents is only if you meet a certain income threshold, and there's all sorts of quotas on that as well. So yeah, that only means children under the age of 22 and spouses, essentially.
Okay. There's another question. If I've already applied for the Humanitarian Compassionate program, can I still do this application?
You can. There's nothing stopping you. So that a Humanitarian Compassion application is a very specific type of application. So that's based off of essentially you just really needing to be in Canada. So I don't know what effect that will have on your Humanitarian Compassion application if you apply under this. I do know that Humanitarian Compassion applications are very limited. They're not often granted. So if you feel like you do qualify under this and you can't apply before the cap is reached, you probably should.
And there's no harm in them taking a language test as well?
No, not at all. Language tests are done privately. The government can't see any language test you do unless you tell them.
Okay. Can I apply to extend my work permit? And if and that is if I have a closed work permit, can I still have the option of extending my work permit?
Yes. So a closed work permit is employer specific. You need another, you can apply to extend it. Yeah, you need to qualify for it. So if you came on a labor market impact assessment, you'll need a new labor market impact assessment or a new basis for the work permit. But if you do qualify, there's nothing stopping you from applying to extend it.
Okay, so for a closed work permit, does that mean that this person would have to still go back to their country and then come back?
No.
Or does that mean they can start the process while they're still here?
Yeah, you can apply to extend it. Period. So yeah, no one has to leave Canada to apply for any permit anymore.
Okay.
They've changed that because of the pandemic. So now you can apply for anything in Canada.
Oh, that's
as long as you don't have, if you've been without status since before 2020, then you may have to leave Canada, but everyone else can apply from within Canada.
okay. And where would where can I go apply for it?
You just Google apply for work permits. Make sure that the web link you follow is canada.ca, or you can just say, how do I apply for work permit? I can just Google it myself and apply and put the link on. Would that work?
That would be really helpful, actually.
Okay.
And while we're waiting, please feel free to send your questions. We still have 10 more minutes or 9 minutes. Oh, perfect.
Yeah, so there's like the link I just gave you. The way the system works is they'll walk you through it. They'll ask you a bunch of questions. Just answer them and it'll point you in the right direction of the application.
Okay, so I have another question here. I feel that this isn't fair to me. I've been working as a farm worker for 15 years. Why don't they include my skills to give me PR?
This is not fair to you. You are absolutely right. This government, this country, lets people come into this country and work as temporary workers for years and years and years, and does not give them path to permanent residency. You are absolutely right. This is not fair to you. The reason I'm here, the reason we're talking, though, is this is the first time they've ever given the opportunity for migrant workers to apply. That ability is extremely limited. You need to get, you need to have the required work experience. You need to have status. You need to have all sorts of different things. But you're absolutely right. This is not fair, but it's something. If you're able to apply under this, that'll be great for you. There'll be a lot of people who won't have that option, but it's something.
We have a follow-up question with regard to a work permit. How do I get an LMIA?
A labor market impact assessment is not an application that you do. It's an application your employer does. So if you find an employer who's willing to hire you, they have to submit a separate application for permission to hire you to another part of the government called Employment and Skills Development Canada. And if that application, and they have to do a certain number of things. They have to show that they've tried to hire Canadians or permanent residents. If that application is approved, then you'll get an LMIA, and you will use that LMIA to apply for a work permit. The labor market impact assessments applications are expensive. They cost $1,000 for your employer. Your employer cannot get that money from you. If your employer tells you that you need to pay them $1,000 for that LMIA, tell them that's against the law. And if your employer is exploiting you and you're on a closed work permit generally, there is a special work permit application for workers who are being abused by their employers on a closed work permit.
So that would be the open work permit?
Yes, that's a special 1-year open work permit where you can work for any employer in Canada. And if you can demonstrate that your employer is abusing you in some way, such as promising you permanent residency and not doing anything about it, or withholding your wages, or making you work for less money than was agreed upon, or for more hours than was agreed upon in your labor market impact assessment agreement, in your work contract, anything like that. If you have that proof that they're doing that to you, talk to a lawyer. Talk to USTCA I'm sure can point you in some direction to someone, and they can submit that work permit application for you and get you work authorization for 1 year.
I've posted the link for the vulnerable work permit.
Yeah, read the description about what exploitation and the description of exploitation and abuse. It's broader than you think it is.
Okay. Let's see. There was one other question that I just missed. If I get 1 year work permit, can I apply for extension?
Yes. You can apply to extend any work permit as long as you qualify.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, and please feel free to add in questions. I'm still looking for more questions.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to.
No, there's that's all the questions we have. Do you have any final words for us?
No, just that, like, the reason I'm here is just kind of give you an outline of the program. There's a lot of things you have to do in order to qualify, and this isn't gonna capture a fraction of the people who qualify. But it's something. I've outlined what to do. Don't, as soon as you hear this, go out spending all this money paying for application fees or police certificates if you're not sure you qualify. Make sure you qualify first. But if you qualify, you might want to look at this application stream. Keep an eye too on the quotas. The number of work, for example, I'm just checking it right now. We're now over 10% of the quota having been reached. So, yeah, keep an eye on it. I just have another question.
Yes. So yes, they're asking about the English speaking requirement. They're saying that it's unfair that they have to pass that assessment.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I was raised in the United States of America, an American citizen. When I immigrated to Canada, I had to pass the English language test. I didn't do perfectly, but I did well enough. The reason is because there's a lot of people in a lot of different countries that don't speak a lot of different languages. For example, I'm also a Brazilian citizen, and my Portuguese is terrible. Mm-hmm. So the government wants to make sure that you're able to speak language regardless of where you're born.
Mm-hmm. And then there's no quota for the French application, or is that separate?
No, there's no quota for the French application. The government wants French speakers and more French speakers in the country. So despite the fact that Quebec doesn't want more immigrants, so if you speak French and don't want to go to Quebec, there may be options for you here. Next, we have, can a vulnerable work permit be renewed? It can. You have to show that the conditions of the first work permit are continuing. I'm not sure what conditions those would be that would continue for 1 full year, but if those conditions do continue, even though you've left work in, you've left the employer and have been on a vulnerable work permit for a year, there's nothing stopping that, but it would be unusual.
Would they have access to PR after a vulnerable work permit?
Potentially. So if you have 1 year of skilled work experience, or in some cases semi-skilled work experience, that's NOC-C, there are pathways to permanent residency in most provinces. Okay. So the big one there is, so if restaurant supervisor or cook is a good NOC-B occupation. So I've had one client who was a fry cook at McDonald's, and that's considered NOC-B skilled work. So you're able to get permanent residency through that.
So when they have a vulnerable work permit, they're not restricted to agriculture industry. They can actually move around anywhere they want.
Anywhere you want.
Okay.
There may be there may be limitations if you didn't have a medical exam, like you can't work with children or in a hospital, whatever. You can get those removed by doing a medical exam.
Okay, so there's one last question we'll answer. I think the one with, would you, they're asking if there's any company that you know of that is willing to do LMIA.
I don't. In Atlantic Canada, it's a bit different because we have a program called the Atlantic Immigration Pilots, which is very similar to LMIAs, but much more streamlined and much more user-friendly. So we use that. We don't do very many LMIAs anymore. Yeah, I can't point you in the direction of a company that would give you an LMIA, unfortunately. But they're just ask around, ask in your community, see if they're able to get you, see if they're able to this point you in the right direction.
Yes. And then you said that vulnerable work permit cannot be renewed, or
it not really. There's nothing stopping you to, but you have to show that you're still vulnerable. You're still the abuse of your employer is continuing. So I don't know how you would do that, but
that would be with the new employer, because assuming that you've got a new employer through your vulnerable.
It would be with the former employer.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So the vulnerable worker work permit is for people. So the way Canada's immigration temporary worker system works is you're tied to an employer, which of course leaves you wide open to abuse, right? Your employer has complete control over you. If your employer fires you, you just lose your you just lose your ability to work, and they have to, so in some circumstances they have to pay for you to return to your home country, but that's it. So there's a huge vulnerability there that for people on closed work permits. So what the vulnerable work permit does is an open work permit. So if you're being abused, the theory behind it is you just leave your employer, go find another employer. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. So the vulnerable workers work permit is only available to those on closed work permits.
Okay. I think that's all the time we have. Thank you so much for all the questions, and thank you so much, Thiago, for all your insight.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, this was good. Let me know if you need anything else.